We have finally gotten the record straight, and we have accurate information out there about the UC investment deals, and people can finally see the bones of this deal with the Big Ten. And the bones say that it's a good deal, that USC and Michigan would be making a big mistake. In my opinion, maybe it's not yours, but in my opinion, USC and Michigan would be making a big mistake if they don't sign it, because they're going to lose out on a lot of dollars and get behind in college football if they do not take the deal. We're going to go through it all, but first, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle, as I am JR. Please do like and subscribe to the channel here. Really appreciate everyone who does that, as we are trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. I think we can do it, but I do need your help to make it happen. So we don't ask you to pay anything, just do the free stuff, all right? I'm not asking you for money. Like, subscribe, turn on notification bell, and comment below what your thoughts are on USC and Michigan and what they're going to do. So get on board or get opposed. I'd love to know you guys' thoughts. So let's find out, as a new article from Ross Dellenger at Yahoo Sports is dropped this morning. Yesterday morning. I'm releasing this on the 14th, but it released on the morning of November 13th, 2025. It was titled on the On3 site, "Inside the Big Ten's $2.4 billion deal, why Ohio State and others could win big." It's available over at On3. It is a locked article, so I don't want to show it to you here, but I will kind of go over it, and I'll link it below for you. So let me tell you, Ross has done an outstanding job here setting the record straight on the Big Ten's capital investment deal with UC Investments. I have to give full credit to Ross and his reporting. He's one of the best in the business at doing this stuff. He's pulling from sources from around the conference to clear up the fog that's been created with some national media personalities who seem to have bias toward the SEC. The main example we'll use in this one is Matt Hayes at USA Today, for example. He called this a financial fleecing and selling their soul to private equity sharks, which is just wildly off base, inaccurate, and honestly just gaslighting you to favor the SEC narrative. The worst part was that a regent of Michigan shared the article, which I don't need to talk about that too much. Greg Flugar over at his channel has talked about that a lot. So if you want somebody to get outraged about that, go listen to him. But Ross's piece directly counters that kind of misinformation, explaining why this is a smart, structured capital play from a public pension fund, not some predatory takeover. And honestly, he's not even trying to go at it from that angle. He's just trying to give you the facts. But let's start with the basics here. Ross lays out, because this is where a lot of the lies get debunked. Now, the deal isn't with a traditional private equity firm. It's with UC Investments, a public non-profit entity. They're buying a 10% stake in the new Big Ten Enterprises subsidiary for $2.4 billion, but it's passive. They get one board seat with just 10% voting power, no decision making in daily operations, and they have to hold it for at least 15 years. A lot of people are asking, what happens after 15 years? Can they sell it to Saudi Arabia? Can they sell it to these people? Well, no, because the schools have authority over any sale after that. That's huge to me, that they don't get to make the decision on who they sell to. The sale has to be approved. That means that UC doesn't think they will want to sell it, in my opinion. They are fine with the Big Ten and its schools having to approve it being sold. Ross even quotes UC saying it's a 100-year investment, which shows this as a long-term partnership, not a quick flip. You can tell this is a direct clap back from the Big Ten with all the misinformation out there. I say Ross Dellenger wasn't biased in it, but you can tell some of this information did come from the Big Ten. But he still did a good job of not presenting it in a biased way, in my opinion. So, to the deal. The deal isn't perfect, all right? I don't want to try and make it sound that way. There might be some hiccups on the road, but it's a good deal, honestly. And that's why 16 schools have agreed to the deal. Hay is calling it financial stupidity, ignores these facts completely. Let's call it like it is. He's rooting for the SEC to stay within range by painting the Big Ten as desperate when they're actually being strategic. Ross does a great job of explaining why big brands like Ohio State are pushing for this. And you might say, well, he's biased there, but it's the question people have been asking, and honestly, if you're a reporter, that's what you should be doing. You should be reporting on the questions people are asking. Last year, Ohio State President Ted Carter hinted at uneven revenue sharing. We made a video about it on this channel, and people lost their minds. Not necessarily at us, but just over the news. He was saying the Buckeyes bring more value. Well, this deal delivers it and introduces tiers where Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, if Michigan joins, get 5.5% of league revenues. Oregon and USC get 5%, and others at 4.9% revenues. Now, up front, they get Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State get $190 million for the top tier, $145 million for USC and Oregon in the next tier, and anywhere from $100 to $110 million for the rest of the schools. Excuse me. There's also a $50 million bonus pool starting in 2037 with new TV deals and brand and success bucket that rewards performance. Things like wins in football and basketball or marketing impact as well. For Ohio State, this means they'd likely be top of the payouts every year, if not in the top 2 or 3, satisfying fans who don't like that they are the main show for Big Noon Kickoff. Not earning any extra for it, which I totally understand. Honestly, this is the best case scenario for Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. They're not just getting more money, they're locking in advantages without giving up control. Hayes claims that the Big Ten doesn't need cash, but Ross points out the financial stresses, revenue sharing with athletes, rising costs. That makes this necessary, in my opinion. The league revenue jumped to $928 million last year, and it's projected at $1.2 to $1.4 billion this fiscal year. But without this infusion, schools could fall apart. And you might say, well, JR, this isn't very fair because the lower schools are not getting as much as the bigger schools. And you might be right, but if the bigger schools don't make more, they're going to leave. So, and the lower schools are still going to make more than they made before. So one of the biggest clarifications Ross makes is on the grant of rights extension to 2046. A lot of critics like Hayes, I'm using Hayes a lot here, he says it's tying the Big Ten's hands together. But Ross spells it out. It's only extending the bond among schools, not with broadcasts or anything like that. The TV deals with Fox, NBC, and CBS, they end in 2030, sooner than any other conference, by the way. I think the SEC is 2034. So no lock-in there, and this debunks the idea it's repeating the SEC's mistakes with their long-term ESPN deal. The grant of rights is about stability in an unsettling time, preventing poaching for Super League distributions. More on the Super League later on. I love what Greg Flugard said on his channel, Peek Around the Corner college football episode. I believe it was either the last one or the one he did before that. I guess it depends on when this gets released. But stability actually increases the value of the media deals. So these grant of rights and teams staying together for longer is going to make these worth more. Think of the NFL and how they thrive on this, and so will the Big Ten. Consistency is key. Networks like Fox, CBS, NBC, they want to know the brands they invest in aren't jumping ship, and they will pay more for that premium of the consistency of teams sticking around. Extending the grant of rights without tying it to broadcasts is huge. It makes the Big Ten more valuable, not less valuable. Ross also dives into why most schools support this, even if it's not perfect. For mid-tier programs, it's all about security. The 20-year bond protects against big brands bolting for other ones. In fact, one of the ADs that Ross quoted said they are pissed that external forces, namely the national media, are trying to disrupt it. Ross said that directly in his story. And for the elites, the uneven structure is a win. But here's where it gets risky for Michigan and USC. And honestly, this is probably where I'm going to have the most opposition. So let me hear it in the comments. That's fine. I'd love to know your opinions. Ross reports that the Big Ten signaled last week they're moving ahead with a tentative vote on November 21 with or without them. If they vote no, their shares go into escrow. It just means they get held. Nobody gets them. That just means Michigan and USC won't get the money. No one will until either they sign it or they don't. And they have a grace period. We're estimating about 6 months, but who knows? We'll see what they come up with. We don't know how long it'll be, but like I said, probably about 6 months, maybe 9 months, somewhere in that range. They'll have that time to be able to opt in, or their grant of rights will expire in 2036. UC's still in it at $2.4 billion, even without them, which means that if they don't take the money, and the rest of the Big Ten will have major financial advantages over them because Michigan and USC don't get the cash infusion. Honestly, I can't see this being a viable decision for USC and Michigan. Honestly, at this point, they have no leverage if the deal is not going to change. And I know you're going to say that, well, I know what you're going to say in the comments. Say, that's fine. And please do say it in the comments. You're going to say, I'd love to hear, what you have to say about the 10% stake and how much they're going to bring in revenue. You're not going to be worth as much with someone who's willing to pay for you. And I'll say it again. You are worth what someone is willing to pay for you. You are worth what someone is willing to pay. That's how you establish your worth, what someone is willing to pay. So when UC is saying they will pay the same amount, With or without Michigan and USC, they don't have any leverage. USC and Michigan do not have any leverage. That's insane, but true. I couldn't believe it when I read that. You could argue that the conference won't make as much money without them, and that could be fair, but I'll leave even more on that in a second. So, at least for now, them threatening to sit out means everyone gets millions while they get nothing. It's great for Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. It seems like they valued so high that the deal doesn't budge without Michigan and USC. And speaking of value, Ross's article shows UC sees the Big Ten as a $24 billion asset. Now, that's implied from the $2.4 billion at 10% stake. If two top brands like Michigan and USC can opt out and the valuation stays the same, that tells me one thing, or that tells me two different things. Sorry. Either one of two different things. One, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon are carrying even more weight than we thought. Probably Ohio State leading the pack on that one, but I don't want to discredit Oregon and Penn State. I'm sure they're in that as well. Now, Hayes completely ignores this, calling it a shell game, but Ross makes it clear. No debt, no repayment. USC only gets paid if revenue grows. And then the second thing, number two, is that the possibility of why USC and Michigan don't add any value or take away any value by leaving is that the Big Ten has its eyes set on adding more schools. It could be bigger or equal brands to Michigan and USC. To go after Big 12 or ACC schools, possibly, that can be top half brands in the conference, and those could maybe add some value, but probably not as much as Michigan and USC. But let's explore the idea of Michigan and USC with their independence, right? Or moving conferences, either one. I see a lot of people saying that the Big Ten needs Michigan and USC more than Michigan and USC need the Big Ten. I would say this news from Ross Dellenger completely debunks that right now, but I'm sure, fans won't like that, and they'll say, they'll disagree with me. That's fine. That's fine. If you want to disagree, like I said, just let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But is it true later on, is my question. It's true right now, but is it true later on? We'll find out, but in order to get this deal done, which is all we know at this point, the Big Ten doesn't need Michigan or USC. Now, there are some people who have the idea that Michigan and USC are heading to the SEC, or they're going to replicate Notre Dame's ACC setup, and honestly just can't see that happening. Based on the past, and that's kind of what we're working on here, future could always change, but based on the past, Michigan's leadership has always prioritized high-level research institutions. They wanted Washington really bad for what they bring with their research stuff. They honestly would never let a school like, and I'm not trying to disparage these schools, but just being honest, they'd never join a conference with a school like Mississippi State, Arkansas, Ole Miss, or Tennessee. Does that mean they wouldn't join them now? No, I guess not, but in the past, they definitely wouldn't. So I'm also skeptical of Michigan fans and their media saying they can just go to the SEC or go independent. Many of them said that Michigan would sue in court about the fine from the NCAA, and that Jim Harbaugh's suspension, they would go to court for that one too. But neither of those happened. They also said it was Ryan Day's brother that ratted them out, and the sign stealing, and we never got news on that being confirmed either. So my concern is not so much with the fans, honestly. I don't hold much against the fans here. Maybe some of the vitriol was a little much, but they're just trying to trust the media members that get stuff from their sources. My issue is with the media peddling some of these stories. They were right on the punishments, so it's not like they've always been wrong. Give them credit where credit is due. They were right on the punishments. They did not get vacated wins. They did not get a postseason ban. But wrong enough recently that I'm not sure I'm buying it when they say Michigan is ready to go independent. On the other side, on the USC side, USC seems to hate the travel already, so adding SEC East Coast games and really the farthest over West SEC school is Texas sounds like a nightmare, in my opinion. That they'd lag behind Oregon and Washington and UCLA in revenue, and USC doesn't seem to want to leave UCLA behind. If they were in the ACC, they would have Cal and Stanford, but that's only two teams with them as opposed to three they have in the Big Ten. So what if they do like Notre Dame does and they're independent and partner with the ACC? I'm not sure that works for them. And I'm not sure that works for the ACC, who needs full payouts from members and not more partial payouts like what Notre Dame is giving them. On the other side of this, or full payments, I shouldn't say payouts, but full payments from members and not partial payments. On the other side of this, one of the reasons this works for Notre Dame now is because Notre Dame is, you know, plays the biggest brands in the ACC more often. They play Clemson, Florida State, Miami. I'm not sure they can schedule those schools with Michigan, USC, and Notre Dame every single year. Plus, they're out of conference rivals. And that's one of the reasons that Notre Dame's TV contract works is because they play the biggest brands in the ACC. Not every single one every year, but at least one or two. Most years, I believe. The ACC is already struggling with a media deal that's viewed as undervalued compared to the Big Ten and the SEC. So adding more partial payments would help, but it would complicate scheduling without ad dollars, right? Bringing in schools like Michigan or USC might sound appealing on paper, but it would be straining the conference's limited resources and forcing cuts elsewhere. And you always have to remember the balancing of Title IX and non-revenue sports. Ultimately, the ACC needs high-value additions that expand national appeal and negotiating power with ESPN, not more partners who make money off their games and don't fully share it with the ACC. But the biggest thing here is that people aren't talking about are the Big Ten enterprises, which is projected to increase revenue by a lot. It's the revenue generator for the media, sponsorships, and events of the Big Ten that will have its own dedicated CEO tasked with making decisions for a conference to increase revenue. I was just listening to a show the other day where the guy was talking about, well, why didn't they do this with a marketing firm? Why didn't they do this with this if they want to earn more revenue? It's because they're going to start their own thing and they're going to hire their own experts for it. You don't need to work with a firm when you can just start your own thing and hire your own experts. So Ross says it's a modernized entity for consolidating deals, unlocking growth. With the national footprint from NYC to LA, it's set to explode with projections of $2 billion annually by 2030. By the time they get to the next TV contract, $2 billion annually by then. That's why UC is in it for the long haul, and that's why the Big Ten will be able to shop hard for big brands like Notre Dame, Texas, Georgia, Oklahoma, and more. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to get those, all right? So don't come at me and be like, JR thinks they're getting Texas or anything like that. But I am saying that if they wanted them, they would have a good shot to go after them and have a lot to offer them because those schools would jump on board for the type of money that Big Ten schools are making now. Now, we don't know exactly how that would work out, but money talks, and that's what people want, especially universities right now. Big Ten money trumps the SEC now, and it will in the future without having to utilize the risk of having to go with private equity to try and keep up. The SEC is locked into their ESPN deal until 2034, but the Big Ten renegotiates sooner. That's why it's confusing to me that Michigan is concerned with the grant of rights. What Super League would they leave for? Most likely, the Big Ten would position themselves to form the Super League, not the victim of it. I mean, if we're just being honest here, the Big Ten is the one that will bring in more schools and have the UC investments deal and have the Big Ten enterprises and everything else. We all agree private equity is terrible, and it will hurt a lot of schools in conferences. So why would the SEC, ACC, or Big 12 teams want to work with that instead of going to the Big Ten where it's public funded money with no controlling power and very little voting power? Spiral deals with no power or control by the investor. If you think about it, it's quite silly to believe that a Super League will form while the Big Ten will already have the deals and the revenue arm. But if we're being honest, all of this Super League and financial superiority, it's not good for college football. I approach stuff from a lot of Big Ten angles, but if I'm approaching this from a just college football fan angle, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's bad for tradition, and many will blame the Big Ten for that. But I don't think it's the Big Ten's fault, personally. Maybe I'm a homer. You tell me. The arms race is killing the history and tradition of college football. And for that, I blame the NCAA. They had no structure on NIL or payments. They clung to, the student athlete claim for too long. And now it's revenue, success, and brands more than anything else. I don't love it. I'm talking on here like it's a good deal, but I don't love it. And I don't want my team left behind. That's the main thing. And the Big Ten administrator didn't want their schools to do that either. And that's why Ross credited the presidents for directing Tony Petitti to go after this kind of deal, rejecting debt for the model. It's not manipulation, it's planning. Hayes calls it bizarre and brazen, but Ross shows why it's smart. wrapping up this article changes things by he wraps up this article talking about changes things, debunking lies out there, and proved a lot that my man Greg Flugar over at Peek Around the Corner said. He was one of the first who broke the USC. Greg Flugar was one of the first who broke the USC. I think he was the first to break the USC to the Big Ten news. And he has been on point with this deal. I'll link Greg's channels down in the description. He does a great job. Go check him out. And credit to Ross for the clarity in reporting all sides of this, right? Ross has reported the Big Ten side. He's went for the SEC side. He's reported the Michigan and USC side. He's done it all. And he's done a great job, honestly. The only thing better might just be the deal itself, because it is a very good deal. Maybe not very good for college football, but it's very good for the Big Ten. Not perfect. I mean, this will probably have some hiccups along the way. Nothing is ever perfect. But 16 schools see how good of a deal this is. We'll see if Michigan and USC do as well. Let me know what you think, how you see it in the comments. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching the Big Ten Huddle. Have a good one.